When I say Persian, I'm not just talking about Iranian, the whole Persian Empire, which would include Tajikistan and Afghanistan at this point. We do have this inclination to versify expressions. Poetry is part of our life. If you are a scholar of physics, mathematics, of literature, in short, anything, you have to have the ability to write in verse. So for the same reason, Avicenna's medical work, half of it is in poetry. Poetry is part of our life. In Iran, in Persian Empire, poets are honored, and we have a rich poetic heritage. The language of everyday life. I never tell you that you look good, you look pretty, you look like a full moon. And in any language, in other language, it may sound weird. If I tell somebody it's beautiful, that they look like a full moon, or if I want to say somebody is tall, I would say she or he is as tall as a sapphire tree. And it doesn't look weird. We have to talk like that. We go on and on about describing something. So we are very, very descriptive. We are also very, because of the fact that Iran has been engaged in wars, in struggles, and also in occupation, we are also very much people who are adapting and adjusting to different cultures very easily. So we bring it in, we make it our own, we kind of dilute it maybe, but we become Persian, make it Persianized. That has also made us, because we have been through lots of struggle, our language has a lot of symbolism. So when we talk, there are lots of symbols in our poetry, even more so. So we read a poem, I interpret it differently, you may interpret it differently, and we both come out very happy with the poem we read or with the answer we got. Books, poetry books in particular, are part of our everyday life. They are as sacred to us as our sacred book. For me, I'm a Muslim, Quran is my sacred book, but I don't know any home that doesn't have a Ferdowsi or a Hafez. In our tradition, we always open Hafez book, we read it, make a wish, and we interpret that. So symbolism is part of it. Now, we have had women poets, not as many as we've had, obviously, male poets, but the more we have had is economic stability, the more we see female poets. Most of these poets, females, are either princesses or courtesans or paid entertainers. So they've had the ability to be educated. I do have a PowerPoint I want to share with you. If I can. Okay. Do you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
So, like I said, many of them were princesses or paid entertainers, but anyway, they were from higher society. In India, in Afghanistan, in Iran, the first women poet that it's documented, she is Rabia Balkhi. Rabia was an intellectual princess, a businesswoman, and a warrior. She lived in the 9th century. She was having a tragic love affair with her brother, the king's secretary slash slave. The love affair was very hidden. It was very platonic. Through all her poetry, you will see that she never talks about physical aspect of life. Mind you, this is 9th century too, but it's almost revering, but very, very platonic. He just, I mean, is in her poetry. She loves him, but from far. She doesn't even want to touch him. I said she's a warrior. What she did was, it seems like the lover went to a war and she got worried. She went to the battlefield and she realized that he is getting injured and beaten by the enemy. So she wears the war attire and she goes incognito to the battlefield. She's a fierce warrior. She's a fierce fence player. So she plays with her swords. She beats the enemy. She saves her lover, comes out of that battlefield, but the tongue starts talking. And her love affair is revealed. So the king, her brother, who really loves her, but in traditional conservative society, the tribe, it's more important than your love of your own family, because your honor becomes your everything. So he feels that this is an illegitimate affair. The family's name is being damaged, and he doesn't believe her sister. So he has her killed. Story has it that she was imprisoned in a bath and her veins were cut, and the next day she was dead. And all around that bath was the poetry for her lover. The next day, when her love finds out what's going on, he goes and kills the king and then goes to Rabe's body and kills himself. So that's their story of their love affair. Rabe is extremely famous, extremely revered in Afghanistan. She, more so than anywhere else, I should say, but she is recited in wedding, in any kind of celebration. She is the picture of tragic love affair. She lived in 9th century and she had correspondence with very famous authors and poets of her time. So Rudaki, who is the very, very famous Persian author and poet, was in touch with her. So it wasn't like she was imprisoned in that sense, but she had to stay to the norm of her society. And unfortunately, that's why she lost her life. The other author or rather poet I'm going to talk about is in 12th century. Her name is Mahasti Ganjavi. She lived in what is now Tajikistan. She was a courtesan. The king was madly in love with her, and she never married him. Most of her poetries are fun love affairs, and also she's an ardent advocate for religious freedom. She's against fanaticism. And one of her poems that I have in English and in Persian is this one that I'm going to read for you. ما را به دم تیر نگه نتوان داشت، در حجره دلگیر نگه نتوان داشت. آن را که سر زلف چو زنجیر بود، در خانه به زنجیر نگه نتوان داشت. You can't be halted by the tip of arrow in a melancholic cell. The one whose hair is like a chain can't be chained indoor. Arrow, never would say, oh, even when I'm talking, I would never say, oh, I'm in prison, I'm dying, the doors are closing. The arrow of this, your heartless tear is going to kill me. So we are always in the mood of exaggeration. Now, fast forward, I'll come to 19th century, and one of the most famous authors and poets of the 19th century is Tahirih. Tahirih is revered by the Baha'i faith and the Babi faith. She is a poet, a human rights activist, and a women's rights activist. Tahir's father was a very famous clergyman who taught her literature, Arabic. She was very well educated. She had a tumultuous marriage. She didn't want to stay married to her husband. She basically leaves her, and she's fascinated by Bab. Bab is the prophet who came before Baha. If I could put it into what we have here in the Mormon faith, Bab is almost like Joseph Smith, and Baha'u'llah is kind of like Brigham Young. So Bab started, and then Baha'u'llah, continued or completed rather the religion. She reveres Bab. She proselytizes for Bab, things that she couldn't do, especially in 19th century. And there is a conference where in the middle of conference, she is the only woman attending. She suddenly reveals herself. She takes off her veil. This is 19th century in Iran, extremely conservative. She takes off her veil and she says, I do not have to have hijab. I do not have to be covered. I am to be shown. This stirs quite a lot of trouble. Subsequently, she gets arrested and she is executed for revealing herself and also for being of a faith that the government thought it was heretic. So on the day of her execution, she says, you can kill me, but you can never kill the emancipation of women. She has the level of martyr for the Baha'is and the Babis. She's extremely, extremely revered. She's one of the 19 sacred people in the Baha'i faith. Now, she has written this poem for Bab. It's a very religious poem for her, but I could as well write it for my lover, or recite it for my lover. If I met you face to face, I would erase my heartbreak, pain by pain, ache by ache, word by word, point by point. In search of you, just your face, I roam through the streets, lost in disgrace, house to house, lane to lane, place to place, door to door. Now, my Iranian friends who are in this audience would probably know this poem by heart. گر به تو افتدم نظر چهره به چهره رو به رو شرح دهم غم تو را نکته به نکته مو به مو. Interestingly, this poem has been recited, memorized, and sung by many, many artists, even to this day. So the Baha'i faith has been, the people of Baha'i faith are persecuted, are prosecuted in Iran. But this particular poem has been broadcasting in radio, television. I don't know if they don't know the author is Tahirih. It would be very unlikely not to know. But it has been such a big part of our everyday poetry that it is beyond who believes in what. A lot of our great artists and singers have sung this poetry, and it's one of the most beautiful ones that I've heard. Now we go to 20th century and we have Parveen Ehtesami. Most of these women are coming from prominent families. Why? Because they were able to have the education. Parveen, one of the significant points in her poetry is her social justice. She seeks social justice. She says, I don't care for political freedom. First of all, she comes also from a family, higher society. Maybe political freedom was not part of her everyday life. But social injustice, it's something that she sees, and she really, really seeks to erase it. She is adamant about education of women. She is adamant about children's rights. And it's interesting. She says, I don't have time for cliche life. She doesn't want to, she feels like the love of one man for another person is just cliche. She says that I am a privileged person. I have responsibilities. I have to take care of those responsibilities first and foremost, than just falling in love with somebody and writing about that. So I think she marries somebody and then 3 months later she divorces him and continues her work. She's very, very adamant about that. She was also educated. She knew French, English, and she was very much fascinated by the fables of La Fontaine, the French fabulist. And she translated a lot of them and put them into poetry in Persian. This is one of her poems. It's a longer one, but I just chose maybe 3 lines of it. A home without a woman lacks amity and affection. When one heart sits close, the soul is dead. Providence has nowhere decreed, in book or discourse, the excellence is man's, defect women's share. In creation's edifice, woman has always been the pillar. Who can build a house without a foundation? در آن سرای که زن نیست انس و شفقت نیست. در آن وجود که دل مرده مرده است روان. به هیچ مبحث و دیباچه‌ای قضا ننوشت. برای مرد کمال و برای زن نقصان. زن از نخست بود رکن خانه هستی. که ساخت خانه بی پای بست و بی بنیان. Now, up until here, all of the admiration and the love we hear, none of them is physical. Mind you, we come from a society that it's very conservative. We are not talking about body in general. So if you talk about somebody who's beautiful, you talk about their eyes, you talk about their height, but you don't talk about their form or body. Talking about even the word breast is a big deal. Making love, it's never into our everyday life. So up until now, nobody has talked about the physical aspects of life until we get to Furugh Farrokhzad. Furugh is prolific. I think she's the most important prolific poet of our 20th century. Her voice, her work has influenced a lot of artists, filmmakers, painters even. Her style is freestyle. She was born and raised in the era where women were supposed to be more obedient, were supposed to conform to the norm of society, where most of all, we're supposed not to attract attention. So she marries this guy, also an artist, at age 16. It's probably an arranged marriage. She doesn't love him. She has a son out of this marriage, and she divorces him. She dares to divorce. and she loses the custody of her son, which puts her through a very, very bad depression. But she dares to fall in love with a married man, a very famous photographer. Their love affair is very, it's very much talked about, and also she's shunned from the society. Why? Because she dared to love. And she also talks about the physical aspects of love. She talks about making love. She talks about being satisfied. These are the things that in a society, in a conservative society, people don't talk about. And perhaps even now, she has paved the way for a lot of other women. These women have talked more about their physical aspect of life and love, but perhaps still she is the one who people can refer to. I have her most famous poem is Another Birth, and I have chosen a little excerpt of it. Life is perhaps lighting up a cigarette in the narcotic repose between two lovemakings, with the absent gaze of a passerby who takes off his hat to another passerby with a meaningless smile and a good morning. She, until here, nobody has talked about lovemaking, and let alone a woman. So she was quite revolutionary in that sense. She unfortunately dies very young in a car accident. So what we have is a collection of her work, which was preserved by her brother and sister, but that's all we have. Couple of books of her, couple of collections. I've chosen another one of her poems. I'm sorry. It's about her sister and her artificial home with her artificial goldfish, and in the security of her artificial husband's love. And under the branches of artificial apple trees, she sings artificial songs and produces real babies. She wants to plant herself. That's the perhaps things would change. And she talks about her sister who's conformed to the norm of society. She's married. She's having babies. She's normal. She's what they call normal. So Furuq was what everybody called abnormal. But sometimes not conforming to the norm of society is what makes you unique and what starts a change. Another artist I want to talk to you about is Simi Nebe. Simi Nebe, she's twice nominated for Nobel Prize in Literature. She has received numerous awards. Her work is kind of divided between two different styles, pre-revolution and post-revolution. By revolution, I mean Iranian Revolution in 1979, which brought a more autocratic, theocratic also republic and to Iran. So before that, her poems are more describing the rain, the smile of her child, it's very nice, but descriptive. After the revolution, she becomes the voice of dissent. She becomes the voice of she was called the Lioness of Iran for her opposition to oppression, particularly oppression of women. She was one of the people who was very much active in an initiative that was called 1 million signature. 1 million signature, they're trying to get 1 million signature of people to try to change certain laws that were not friendly toward women, including the equal right to have the equal right to divorce, to have the equal right in regarding custody of children, including inheritance, including, so if I, as an Iranian woman, if I marry a non-Iranian man, at that time, I could not pass my nationality to my children. Whereas if my brother married a non-Iranian, he could have, passed his nationality. Things have changed. So she was extremely, extremely active in that sense. She was unfortunately even beaten and imprisoned right before her death in 2014. I think the best description of Simi Nebe is what another author, Farzaneh Milani, gave her, that she called her the elegant voice of dissent, of conscience, of non-violence, and of refusal to be ideological. Now, in this poem that I chose for you, I feel like you can see also how, as Persian, we speak. If I'm going to build my country again, I'll build it from my bones, from the bricks would be from my life. The tears would be torrents. So, and that would be completely normal. My country, I will build you again, if need be, with bricks made from my life. I will build columns to support your roof, if need be, with my bones. I will inhale again the perfume of flowers, favored by your youth. I will wash again the blood off your body with torrents of my tears. دوباره می سازمت وطن اگرچه با خشت جان خویش. ستون به سقف تو می زنم اگرچه با استخوان خویش. دوباره می بویم از تو گل به میل نسل جوان تو. دوباره می شویم از تو خون به سیل اشک روان خویش. So you see how we're using the poetry, kind of the language of exaggeration, but this is how we have survived. I'm gonna stop here with my presentation, but I will be remiss if I don't talk about Nasrin Sotoudeh. She is an acclaimed human rights lawyer who started her hunger strike. She's imprisoned. She's in the notorious Evin prison. She, because of her activities, because of her human rights activities, she has been imprisoned. The sentence for now is 38 years. She has started her hunger strike on August 11, so it's a month now that she has been on hunger strike. Her demand is to free political prisoners, at least during the pandemic. So we have beautiful authors, beautiful poets. The poetry is beautiful, but I think people like Nasrin are the authors of our life. They are writing about our future and our freedom. So I just wanted to share with you her story as well and be a voice for her. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Lily, very much. This is very poignant, very rich, very full. If you'll let me ask a question, just start out the discussion section of our event with a question.
Sure.
What stands out to me in your presentation is how poetry seems to thrive in this kind of fraught intersection between plenty and scarcity, between barriers and between striving. It seems to be that these women poets are like, they're very visceral, they're very bodily, and you can just almost see and sense a kind of eruption of activism, of desire for change. Do you think that poetry thrives more in a conservative society that places barriers on not only on politics, but maybe on the heart. That there's a kind of pent-up energy waiting to be released. Do you think that's true with Iran?
I think so. I think with Iran, because also it's poetry is a language of symbolism. You can also almost get away with what you want to say and not get arrested, not get harassed, not get shunned. So in such society, I believe that language of symbolism and language of poetry will thrive more. We are also people who body language and our language in general has helped us survive. So in different ways, in different torrents. So yes, I believe that because of the symbolism of poetry, because of all those mysticism, yes, poetry has helped us and is helping these women right now.
Mm. And I also noticed this this kind of rich spiritual religious diversity, even within Islam, that is active in Persia, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, all over that region. So the Baha'is, the faith of the Baha'i is present. Shia Sufism. Sufism is more prominent in the poets like Rumi, I think. So do you think that the poetry of Iran is enriched by this diversity? Does this poetry kind of ever attain unto a level of a kind of spirituality unto itself?
I believe so. I think part of our, because poetry is such a big part of our life, I think that this diversity also has helped us, has helped also our people. So for example, when you look at poetry from 10th century until now, there is this, and perhaps because people have been through much more oppression, there is also as a philosophy, I mean, especially from Mongol invasion, that life is terrible, life is not ever going to be good. This is the mentality of people. So a lot of poets, including Rumi, tell us that, yeah, life is not good, but your best revenge is to have a good life. So, for example, Rumi says that, even if I die, you're not allowed to mourn. You have to have music, you have to have dance. Now, a lot of people would say that Rumi was very religious. How could you dance? That's where the symbolism come from. You can dance for the God. You can dance around your beloved. So I think, yes, I think it has helped us a lot. I also think, and one of our most revered poet is Ferdowsi, to whom I think we owe our language after the Arab conquest. For 200 years, Iranian could not speak Persian, could speak Persian, but could not correspond in Persian, and their language was kind of getting broken, not to mention their psyche. And somebody like Ferdowsi comes around and writes this book of King, Shahnameh, and tells us about our glorious past, and tells us that you are the sons and daughters of these people, of these heroes. He has a lot of female hero, a lot of female warrior in his book, and says, you are the sons of these people. You have to be proud of yourself. By the virtue of you being on this land, you have to be proud. This is the psyche of people who are broken, who have been told that you cannot even speak properly. They're called ajam, as in not being able to speak correctly. That's the title that the conquerors are giving them. And this guy comes, and to this date, and that's why I'm saying that, for example, the Book of Kings, it becomes almost as important as the Holy Book in every single household. because it gives you back your pride. It gives you back, you are, you have a national identity. You are Iranian. Your duty is to your land, to God, to your king equally. So it becomes very important. And he brings out a lot of female heroes, love stories, female heroes, that they are as good, as courageous as male heroes. So yes, I think poetry has been very, very important, even to this day when people are, we are under oppression, we are very, very under horrendous sanctions, economically, in terms of freedom, everything that people are really, really oppressed. And what helps them is poetry, and also at this point, satire. Satire has become part of our everyday life as well. In a matter of seconds, people are making something. And it's funny, and you laugh, and you know that you have to cry, but you laugh. So.
Well, let's open this up to our those who are attending. Feel free to submit a question through the Q&A button, or even through the chat button, but preferably Q&A button. If any of you have questions, please ask Lily. In the meantime, while you're thinking of your questions, let me just ask about, what are your thoughts about the way that the classical Persian poets, male, in most cases, not all cases, the way that they express themselves, maybe the freedom that they felt expressing themselves, and how that differs from the way that Persian women poets express themselves.
Well,
Did you see a difference?
Depending on where you are, the region you are. For example, when I was looking at these poetries, Rabi'a from Afghanistan, it's much more religious than Mahasti, and these are 9th century and 12th century, than Mahasti, who's from Tajikistan. Way less religious, and perhaps less conservative. So I think it also depends also where in the empire you are. That makes a difference. But yes, but male or female, the word for love, it's actually more so like. Dost داشتن becomes more important than ish, to love something. So, and God knows it's true, sometimes I love somebody, but I really don't like them at the moment. So it's very important to like, becomes more. A lot of male Persian poets, what they wrote about love is not their beloved as in male or female. It's mostly they talk about beloved as in God. But they get away with a lot of things in that sense. Females are more, they're, at least in my experience, even if it's about love, it's about love of a child, love of the beloved, but it's far. All the way until Furugh Farrokhzad, we never had the physical aspect. But they do explain differently. There's a lot of male poets also who express their love for another male. And in different ways. Some people would say Rumi was in love with Shams. Some people say that that was a different holy love. But we don't have that in women, not that I have seen.
We have a question from Willie. He asks, are there any particular poetic forms these women use, or are they writing in free verse?
Late 20th century, free verse has become much more common. Before that, if you're writing a love poetry, it's ghazal. So they always have rhymes, but different sorts of rhymes. Rubaiyat is one of those, like Khayyam. It's been used a lot too. But if it's a love poetry, it's always ghazal, almost always.
Hmm. So we have another question from the legendary Frans Nielsen. He asks, it seems like the women you presented had some education. Do you think their education played a big role in the quality of their poetry? Maybe education helped them think deeper and therefore able to express deeper.
I'm sure it did. I'm sure it did. That and also the fact that their poetry has been recorded. So if there was a woman who was not as privileged and was a poet, there is no record of them. Mm. But these people at least had the privilege that their poetry was recorded. Yes, they were exposed to a lot more than average regular people. Even, for example, Parvineh Tesami or Tahirih in 19th century, they had their fathers or their parents, they taught them very well. Parvineh Tesami traveled a lot to Europe with her family, so she was exposed to different cultures. And of course, that was part of her being exposed to and seeking social justice.
So we have another question from Willie Palomo. He asks, are there any anthologies of Persian women literature or particular poetry collections you would recommend?
Farzaneh Milani has translated a lot of these poets of Simi Nebe and Furugh Farrokhzad. Milani, like Milan, the city in Rome, in Italy, Milan and I at the end. And her first name is Farzaneh, starts with that, from University of Virginia. I can put it on chat if.
Okay. In the meantime, well, as we wait for more questions, let me just try my hand at another question. And granted, my perceptions of this are based on the poets you've selected and the poets that I've read in the past. But it seems to me that as the most kind of mystical, almost elliptical, mysterious, very symbolically rich poetry that comes from early Persia, like Rumi and Hafez and Khayyam. It seems like they're less interested in the domestic, less interested in the day-to-day, but they're more interested in what's going on kind of underneath the surface, underneath the kind of the skin of day-to-day experience. Rumi's talking about water all the time and how that relates to love. But these women poets that you've talked about today, they're very much interested in what's happening kind of above the surface, less mystical, and they're more worried about justice, about the survival of their society. Do you think that, and maybe this is a function of the time period as well, but with modernity, there's more concern with the tangible, and less perhaps with the mystical. Do you see that difference at play, and what do you think about that?
That, I think you're absolutely right. We don't have too many women who were in, that we can find in the past. The present, I would say yes, the women are, in general, I think women are more practical. So they think about, the everyday. Rumi Attar in particular, they lived also under the persecution and occupation. So they needed to be more mystical. Mm. At that time, there may not have been too many women who were in, we have documentation about. But yes, I would say that they were less mystical. I found a poetry of, while we are waiting for a signal, I found one poet about this woman, I will read it to you. She is, I don't know if I can share it. She is maybe 30 something years old. Her name is Hila Sediqi. And she is very much against this enforced hijab, enforced cover that women have right now. And this is the poem that she recited, and then she got arrested by it. But even that, you can read it and you can say that it's still not necessarily against hijab, that hijab. I'm veiled because of your spoiled body and mind. You're asleep behind this worn out curtain, and I, with the same forbidden hair of mine, will weave a ladder as tall as sunrise to bring out the sun. Hijab is also a curtain, so she could easily say that I am under the curtain and I'm waiting for the sun to rise. But most likely, she's talking about the hijab that is imposed upon her.
Mhm.
So I'd say yes, women are more talking about more practical in that sense.
So we have one question from an anonymous attendee. Would you say the translation of these poems into other languages completely captured the voice of these poets? Is there anything in particular with these poems that are lost when translated out of their original language?
If I like poetry in its own original language in general, I feel like when I read a poem in French or in English, in the original language, I get more about it. But this is the closest one can come to the poetry without knowing the language. So I think depending on who's the translator, if they know, so you have to know not only the language, but also the circumstances and the culture. I think this is the best we can come. Farzaneh Milani, for example, she's an Iranian herself. She knows not only the language, but also the culture. So one would hope that she has captured the best of it as much as possible. But if I tell you, I'm dying for you, I mean, you'd be, you have to find some equivalency. If I say, I love you so much, my heart is gonna burst. It's just too much. So the art is not only to know Persian, but also to know English good enough to be able to find that balance. But some of them are really good. Davis is also good.
What is good?
Davis. He has done a lot of also translation.
So we have another question. It sounds like poetry is an essential part of the culture in Iran and that part of the world. Does the younger generation feel as passionately about poetry as does the older generation?
I wish I could say yes. We live in the age of Twitter and instant gratification, so it has become less important, but it's by no means it is dead, by no means. So when I was growing up, one game that we had was that you would tell me a verse that, let's say, ends with letter D. And then I had to start a verse from any poet that started with letter D. And the trick was to end it with something that is hard, let's say L. And then you have to start something with L. So we would go on and on until one of us, kind of doesn't know what to say anymore. They lack it, or they get kind of stumped. Those were fun games, but also, made you learn poetry, made you, it was challenging, but it was good, fun. Now we have video games and, all sorts of other things, and TVs and different versions of Netflix. So it's hard to have that attention. But I have to say, there are two things right now in Iran. One is that because anytime we have a very oppressive time, we have a return to Sufism and to the fact that life is not that important, but we have to be, we have to be content. There is also another one that it's very much a return to, and this is, I'm saying it as a practicing Muslim. I'm not, denying that, that Islam has an incredibly big part of our life. But right now, because of the oppression of Islamic Republic, a lot of people are talking of the time before, the glorious past. So there is a big reversion also to Ferdowsi, to Shahnameh, to whatever is pre-Islamic. So people are still doing poetry.
It reminds me of a saying that is very prevalent in the Russian literary mindset, which is that a writer can be like a second government. That a writer can wield the pen and have the kind of power and influence over minds that a government can have. And do you think that modern day poetry is influential enough to have that kind of influence in Iranian society? To shape the political mindset?
It is certainly powerful. It can get the image and get the message within a couple of words. And even to this day, it is very, very powerful. Also, in our tradition, one of the things that in the Holy Book, in Quran, God swears to it, is the pen. So pen is not only important, but also sacred. So yes, it's very important. And that's why authors and poets are getting arrested left and right.
Do you see poetry coming out in different forms today, perhaps in the form of pop cultural forms like popular music?
Rap music is very popular in the Muslim world.
Oh, really?
Rap music is very, very popular. I see a lot of political satire. I haven't seen much of love poetries. It seems like people are a little bit jaded right now. But rap is very much big deal.
Well, we have a question from Beatrice Lipeniaks. She asks, what is the attitude of the current political regime toward the poetic legacy of the Persian culture? Is it still an important part of the early education?
Yes. It has been such a big foundation of our language and our culture that even our leaders, if they want to say that they're educated, they definitely publish their poetry work. So Ayatollah Khomeini, the founder of revolution, has a big book of anthology of poetry. I believe Ayatollah Khamenei has one too. So poetry has been so much part of our life that they really cannot deny it. At the beginning of revolution, they wanted to deny some of or lower the importance of some of our Persian tradition, including our New Year, which is the first day of spring. And they were not able to do that either. So it's been so much integrated in our life that no, I have to say. But you can easily claim that Rumi is yours, Hafez is yours, and I can also claim that it's mine. So that's the beauty of poetry.
And it seems like poetry can be wielded by any or all sides of the cultural argument, debate.
Totally. So we have a lot different festivities. Most of our festivities actually are agricultural festivities. So we have one in October that is kind of like Oktoberfest minus beer. It used to have wine, I think, back then. And then there is one that we celebrate the longest night of year, which is the first day of winter, the eve of winter. So we sit with our families, we eat everything that is almost red, persimmon, pomegranate, watermelon, dried fruit, and we help the angel of darkness, angel of light, to in her battle against angel of darkness until the crimson comes out. One of the things we do is we read poetry, especially Hafez. Hafez is part of our like everyday life. One of the things we do is that we get the book of Hafez and we think of something. Let's say you have a job interview, and then you say, am I going to get that job? And then you send a prayer to Hafez's soul, and then you open the book and you say, Hafez, reveal yourself to me. Tell me what I'm going to do. Tell me what's going to happen to, is that boy going to answer my phone? Am I going to get that job interview? And then you open the book and then you read that poem. Now you read it and you may interpret that, oh, I'm going to get that job. And I'm going to read it and I'm say, oh, he's going to call me. The same poem. But it's a tradition that has been part of, it's a Persian tradition. So it's pre-Islamic tradition. But Hafez has been added to it ever since Hafez became Hafez.
So in this case, poetry develops a sort of scriptural status.
It is scriptural.
So, yeah. That testifies to the power of it.
Yes. So I don't know any household that does not have Hafez. I don't know any household that does not have Ferdowsi, the Book of Kings. Rumi, these are part of our everyday life. So because you recite them, you tell them, when I'm telling you something, I definitely am using a verse of this poet or that poet as to emphasize my meaning. So, and I do not have to be extremely well educated to use poetry. In fact, our version of soap opera, old soap opera version, was these, at the time, old men, but now we have some women too, who recite the stories of Book of Kings. And they had these big curtains that they would go to these tea houses. Mostly at the time, men would go. So they had these tea houses, they had these curtains with the story of the battle of these heroes. So we have our version of Hercules. His name is Rostam. So the battles of Rostam. And the minute things would get heated and exciting, they would say, okay, if you want to know what's happened to him, come back tomorrow. And it will continue. So like I said, soap opera of the time. And these men may not even have had 5 years of education, elementary school. But they were able to recite these poetry and they were able to excite you with almost nothing. It was just their cane. And they would create the battle right in front of you.
It brings the past to life.
Yes, very much so. And now there are a couple of women who are doing it too. It's a very, very much male-dominated business. Now it's more like dramatic art. But at some point, the people were actually earning their lives. They would go to these tea houses, they would create these stories, and I'm assuming that they would give a percentage to the tea house owner and live their lives.
Well, unless we have another question coming up, I believe we will end this fascinating discussion.
Well, thank you again for having me.
Thank you very much. I think this is what Books and Bridges tries to do, enlarge our horizons and enlarge our hearts, and to see things beyond our limited vision. And I think you've done that tonight. I appreciate it very much, Lily. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.